Right, whilst the rear brake and rear wheel and stuff is off, I also want to replace the rubber bushes on the inside here. These are all for the suspension. Suspension unit is in here. It's filled with oil, whole series of baffles and such, and the oil will want replacing, so I'll do that whilst it's off. So I'll take the whole unit off, then press this off, put new bearings in, rubber bearings in, and put it all back together again. Well, I got the suspension unit out. Something that should be reasonably straightforward turned out to be less than that. I'll take the battery out and all sorts of nonsense. Impossible to reach bolts, but we got it eventually. Getting it back again is going to be interesting. These are the bushes I want to replace. Especially the bottom one looks fairly second-hand. I had to use a bearing puller to separate this arm from the unit. Not quite sure I'm going to get it back into the right position, but there we go. Again, these things are sent to trials. We will have a look at it, because I also have to measure the rate of descent of the unit to see if that's still within spec. Hopefully it is. Don't really fancy having to send these off to rebuild as well. But then again, it might well be that there's no oil left in them. So we shall see. I'll come back to this in a bit. Well, I've mounted the unit on a piece of board. Got 110 degrees measured out. Allegedly, if you have a 20-pound weight, it should take an amount of time to get down to the bottom mark. But since I don't know the time yet, I've sent out word to see if I can find out what that is. I'm just doing it with a 10-pound weight, and that takes roughly 18 seconds to get down to the bottom. Now the numbers on top, T, 12, 8 and 2.0, they are stamped on the back of the unit. They mean something, but I'm not quite sure what they mean. Again, I've put a question out on the Rover forum to see if there's anybody who can shed some light on that. At the moment it's still in its original setup as it was on the car, so I will clean the unit out, put new oil in it, and then try the same experiment and then see if that already makes a difference or what. So yes, interesting times. Well, I've got as much of the oil out of it as I could. It's an EP oil, so it's a fairly thick oil, but whether it's quite supposed to be as syrupy as this, I'm not sure of. Anyway, we shall see. There is an adjustment screw in the middle of this hole. Behind it is actually the measuring hole. I'm fairly sure, because you're supposed to put 3/4 of an inch from the top. Yes, but that's how far you're supposed to fill it up. Anyway, so I made a little sticky with a couple of marks on it, just for the refilling bit. Anyway, I'm going to clean it up, slosh it out with a bit of diesel, and then see what the story is, how much oil will go back in. I'm also fairly sure there's supposed to be a locking mechanism on this. I have seen that on another one, I'm fairly sure. Anyway, we shall investigate as per usual and see what the story becomes. Well, the old oil, I think on the right, is a bit different to the new oil on the left. I think it was about time it was done. It's probably not been done for a while. Right. This unscrews with some silly size Whitworth screw, but everything on the car is Whitworth, so that's not a worry. In here is a little adjustment screw. A quarter of a turn is what it needs to adjust the rate of drop for the suspension. So it really doesn't take an awful lot to change it by about 3 or 4 seconds. By my reckoning, it's about 3 seconds per 1/6 of a turn, so per side of the head. So once you get it filled up with fresh oil, you have to work it up and down on the handle jobby to get all the oil out of the system. It's taken about 130 milliliters of oil to get it back to a sensible level, which is a bit more than came out of it, I think it's fair to say. But I don't know when it was last done, so it seems like a reasonable exercise. Yes, so I'll go and set it up for the quick little drop test. I'll show that. Well, the more observant people watching this will have noticed that this is a completely different unit. This one has 2 bolts instead of 4 bolts. I got a bit carried away with the rear suspension unit, which are the 4-bolt versions. I forgot to make a film. Anyway, needed to do the front ones as well. So here it is, same principle applies. Need to get that set to 12 seconds over 5 inches of bar. The rear ones are 12 seconds over 8 inches of bar, which also explains the numbers on the casing of the rear one. T12, I imagine, 8 being the length of the bar. Don't know. That's my guess. Ill-informed as it is. But there we go. Yes. So this is the front suspension unit, exactly the same thing. I've just put new oil in it, and when you start setting it up, it really has no resistance whatsoever. It takes a fair bit of working out, and then all of a sudden you're starting to get resistance at the extremes. Just keep doing it, and eventually it'll settle itself. This is also, by the way to get the oil out, is to take the top screw off and just wiggle the arm up and down with the center screw removed. Much easier than anything else. You can't get the oil out anyway. So yes, this works. It's also a different board, of course. I did find someone very kindly had put on a proper Luvax suspension guide, and they suggest to make this board. Probably a bit more professionally than I have, but there we go. It seems to do the job. I have a little extension to extend this out to 5 inches, because at the moment it's about 3.5 center to center. So yes, I'll set that up and then come back to it. Well, as is the case with so many things, should not have left it to the last unit. As per usual, the last one goes wrong. Anyway, there is a rubber gland here that stops your oil from sloshing out. That has given up the will to live, I think. It's also not quite right on the inside. I can't get the drop test to go low enough. So in a few weeks' time there's a jumble sale for the Rover club, so I'll have a hunt around for one of those units there. In the meanwhile, it's working. It drops in about 7 seconds or 8 seconds instead of 12, so it's not great, but it's not as bad as it could be. It's a shame that. I'd like to have done it all properly in one go, but I need some internal bits for this job, which I don't have. I mean, they're probably in a box somewhere in the world, but anyway, I'll see what I can find at jumble sales, and if I can find the right bits or a complete unit, I'll pull that apart and make that a separate video on how to do that, but that'll require manufacturing a whole heap of tools, I think. Anyway, a shame, but there we go. I hope it's been of use to someone. As I say, the other 3 units worked perfectly well getting them set up. This one does not want to play ball. Oh well, such is life.